Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack the incredible ancient drama of Israel's first three kings. We're going to take a really close look at the history of the united monarchy, focusing on exactly how King Saul, King David, and King Solomon lived, how they ruled, and, crucially, how the people actually felt about them. We're talking about an era of massive political shifts, where public approval literally meant the difference between a golden age and total rebellion. Sounds kind of familiar, right?
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the demand for a king, then move on to Saul, the tragic pioneer, followed by David, the beloved warrior, and Solomon, bringing wisdom and wealth. Finally, we'll wrap up with the monarchy's lasting legacy. Let's get to it.
The whole thing actually kicked off with a literal demand from the public. The historical text tells us the people went straight to the prophet Samuel and just flat out asked for a ruler, someone to judge them, lead them out, and fight their battles. This was a huge, dramatic pivot away from the old era of prophets and judges. They wanted a tangible, powerful leader they could actually see. Basically, they wanted a king, just like all the neighboring nations had.
Act 1. Saul, the tragic pioneer. Let's look at the tall, handsome, but deeply flawed first king to take the throne.
How King Saul actually came to power is wild. He started from incredibly humble beginnings. According to the historian Josephus, Saul was literally out wandering the countryside with a servant, looking for his father Kish's lost donkeys, when the prophet Samuel stumbled upon him. Talk about looking for livestock and finding a crown. There was no massive, powerful royal lineage here. He was just a young guy from the tribe of Benjamin with a comely countenance. And honestly, at first he felt totally inadequate for the job, pointing out that his family was the absolute smallest of his tribe.
But he quickly proved himself. Saul gained his early popular approval through massive military victories and his incredibly imposing physical presence. The text actually note there was literally no one more handsome, and he stood head and shoulders taller than anyone else. Now sure, some early doubters asked, "How shall this man save us?" But Saul completely silenced them. He led the Israelites into battle and famously slayed around 60,000 enemies. When he came back triumphant, the people absolutely lost it. They rejoiced exceedingly. They loved his success, and for a while he reigned happily, subduing the neighboring nations. But unfortunately, that popularity didn't last. Saul's downfall was just as rapid and dramatic as his rise. First, he disobeys direct commands regarding the Amalekites. But what really tanked his standing with the public was taking on excessive despotic power. Josephus writes that Saul's whole disposition changed when he got a taste of power, spiraling into intense paranoia, and this culminated in a truly horrific crime. He ordered the murder of Ahimelech the high priest and his entire family, showing absolutely no pity for infants or the elderly, and entirely overthrew the city of the priests. That devastating cruelty completely wiped out his public approval and his divine favor. Almost overnight, he went from a beloved war hero to a feared tyrant in the eyes of his subjects.
Act 2. David, the beloved warrior. Let's see how this massive power vacuum paved the way for a wildly popular shepherd turned king. The contrast between how these two kings lived and ruled is just staggering. While Saul was descending into fearful paranoia, literally standing in awe of David's growing success, David's star was absolutely skyrocketing. The historical text explicitly points out that David behaved wisely in everything he did. And because of that success, the texts note that all Israel and Judah loved David. They saw him as a true man of valor and war. So public opinion completely shifted away from the house of Saul and rallied right behind David.
David took that massive popular mandate and run with it, uniting the people and expanding their borders. He bravely captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites, who, by the way, had totally mocked him, and established the famed city of David. And because the people held him in such high regard, his building projects really flourished. Even Hiram the king of Tyre sent messengers, cedarwood, carpenters, and stonemasons just to build David's house. The public saw a king bringing real security, international prestige, and tangible growth to their nation.
And he held that throne for a solid 40 years. He was only 30 when he started. He spent 7.5 years ruling over Judah and Hebron, and then another 33 years reigning from Jerusalem over all Israel and Judah, firmly cementing the foundations of the kingdom. Think about that. 40 years meant an entire generation grew up knowing nothing but the stability and growth that David brought. For the vast majority of that time, he enjoyed the fierce, unwavering loyalty of his people.
But of course, it wasn't without its intense internal drama. David's own son, Absalom, actually led a massive rebellion that shook the very core of the people's loyalty. The kingdom fractured, and David was forced to temporarily flee Jerusalem. It was a mess, with disputes raging across all the tribes.
It got so bad that even after Absalom died in battle, David was paralyzed by grief. His commander Joab literally had to warn him that if he didn't go out and thank his soldiers, everyone would abandon him. It's essentially an ancient, high-stakes PR crisis. David had to actively work to win back public favor, completely changing his habits and sitting out at the city gates just to be seen and hailed by the crowds.
Which brings us to a fascinating question. When David eventually passed, the kingdom was exceedingly well established and incredibly wealthy. But who steps up to manage such a politically complex machine? Who could possibly follow a universally beloved warrior king?
Act 3. Solomon, bringing wisdom and wealth. Welcome to the era of the ultimate architect of Israel's golden age.
King Solomon didn't just rule, he engineered an era of absolute, unprecedented grandeur. The people's experience under Solomon was radically different from anything under Saul or David. When he was anointed, the texts say the earth and air literally echoed with the sheer volume of musical instruments and cheering crowds. He brought massive international fame to the table. Kings from all over the world who heard of his wisdom sent incredible gifts, vessels of gold and silver, purple garments, massive amounts of spices. He was a brilliant builder and a true intellectual, setting a completely new tone for how the monarchy even operated.
It's hard to even wrap your head around the sheer scale of his assets. 3,000 parables spoken, 5,000 songs written. He amassed 40,000 broodmares and 12,000 horsemen. His daily provisions were just immense. This was a level of prosperity, organization, and wisdom so magnificent that when the famous Queen of Sheba visited and saw his palace, his banquets, and the apparel of his servants, she was left completely breathless. It was a scale of wealth the Israelites had quite literally never seen before.
Yet despite all that mind-blowing wealth and wisdom, his public relations eventually completely tanked. Solomon married the Pharaoh's daughter along with many other foreign wives. The sources tell us this led the people straight into idolatry, burning incense and sacrificing on high places. On top of that, to fuel those massive architectural projects we just talked about, he imposed heavy, crushing labor and brick-making burdens on the common people. He completely alienated the very citizens he was supposed to protect. And that deep, boiling dissatisfaction ultimately sparked the rebellion of Jeroboam, who fled to Egypt but would soon become a pivotal figure in the permanent fracturing of the kingdom.
Conclusion: the monarchy's lasting legacy. Let's bring all of this together to really understand the ultimate legacy of this early experiment in monarchy. We've just looked at three wildly different men, three completely different leadership styles, and three very distinct relationships with the public. Spanning roughly 120 years, these three distinct reigns, 40 years for Saul, 40 years for David, and 40 years for Solomon, completely set the historical and cultural landscape of the ancient world. And each leader deeply impacted how the public viewed the throne. Saul showed the terrifying danger of despotic paranoia. David demonstrated the incredible unifying power of a beloved, successful warrior. And Solomon proved that even unparalleled wealth and wisdom can still lead to massive public resentment if the burdens on everyday people become too heavy.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to ponder from today's explainer. Regardless of divine right, brilliant military strategy, or unmatched wisdom, does immense power and unchecked wealth ultimately always fracture the loyalty of the people? It's a heavy question that the Israelites grappled with thousands of years ago, and honestly one that remains incredibly relevant to how we view leadership today. Thanks so much for joining us as we explore the first kings of Israel.